Okay, so the next disadvantage of a floating exchange rate regime that we're going to look at, or potential disadvantage, we actually looked at a bit earlier as an example of an advantage of floating exchange rate regimes. The flexibility for dirty or managed floating. So you may remember this slide from earlier. Flexibility, I think we briefly skimmed over it. Flexibility to be a dirty or managed floating regime. That flexibility can also be a disadvantage because the government or central bank, so central authorities, in a flexible situation also have an open mandate to do whatever they see fit with monetary policy levers. So they can buy and sell foreign and domestic currency reserves, use interest rates and money supply in order to manipulate the value of the exchange rate. And what does this mean? It means that the electorate of a democratic country, democratic system, may actually be giving up sovereignty of their currency to an unelected body. So in a dirty or managed float mandate that's enforced, it could be enforced by a non-publicly elected body, such as a central bank committee, and this could actually be a threat to democracy. This is all part of the wider question, which is who is really to decide what is best for a country's currency and the people of the country? Is that an elected representative or the head of an appointed committee or an elected committee of experts? And a good example of this could be in the United States right now. So the Fed balance sheet has grown since 2009 from $1 trillion to $4 trillion in 2014. Now we're going to look at the details of this much later on in the video series, so don't worry too much about the knowledge and understanding of exactly what's going on here as yet. It will all be explained later. But the Fed's balance sheet growing from 2009 from 1 trillion to 4 trillion in 2014 due to quantitative easing, as in increasing the money supply and shifting government debt from the private sector to the central bank balance sheet, because quantitative easing is the central bank essentially purchasing government bonds. And those bonds sit as assets on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. And this can be a good example of how sovereignty is lost in a country, because now there's a conspiracy theory that says the Federal Reserve has its own agenda. The Federal Reserve's agenda is to control the US government by owning large portions of US government debt. And if you control the US government and their spending and taxation, you control America. Now, obviously, that's a conspiracy theory. I'm not massively into conspiracy theories myself, but you can see the argument. The argument is that a non-directly elected committee, a non-directly elected committee by the electorate, is essentially setting their own agenda. This could be a situation in which the spending of the federal government in the United States is determined in the future by what the Fed will or will not allow them to do, because they are one of the owners, or a large portion of US government debt. So this whole idea of floating exchange rate regimes providing an advantage of flexibility for central authorities to intervene, this could also potentially be a huge disadvantage in terms of sovereignty. in overall society. Okay, so plenty to think about there in terms of the advantages and disadvantages of floating exchange rate regimes, and therefore inferring the disadvantages and advantages of fixed exchange rate regimes.